Sri Gurubhyo Namaha Chintan. In last chapter, we have discussed about Python character set, tokens, backbones of the Python program, variable and assignments, some simple and output operations. Today in this chapter, we are going to discuss a new chapter called as data typing. In programming language, we need to know some of the elementary terms in your programming language. So we need to understand such fundamentals in your programming. So the fundamentals, which are nothing but we have to learn about data types, variables, operators and expressions in Python. So Python provides a predefined data types for handling different data and its uses. So we are going to discuss what are the different types of data that we are going to handle in a programming in this chapter. Python provides a predefined set of data types for handling data and its uses. That is, we will be having, when we are doing a particular program, we need to handle different types of data. It may be your string, or it may be your complex values, or it may be your integers or floating point values. So we need to understand what are the different predefined set of data that we are going to handle in programming. Data can be many types. It may be a character, a string, an integer, or a real. Python, like another languages, provides a ways of facilitators to handle different types of data by providing different types. Now we are going to discuss different types of data. Python data types. So what is data type? A data type means to identify a type of a data and associated operations of handling it. Right? So what type of data that we are going to use and what are the operations that we are going to implement on that particular data. So which is described as your data types. In each Python, that is in each value is an object. So whatever value that you provide in a Python, we call that as an object, has a data type. So it has its associated data type. Suppose if I have value as 20, which means that it is going to be 20 is an object for me. And what is the data type associated? Which is nothing but integer. Like that, for all the data in your data types, when you consider, you will be having an associated object and its associated type of value also you will be having in your program. So what are the different types of data type that we have? Numeric. Numeric, again, it is categorized into an integer value, float value, and a complex value. Apart from that, we have dictionary, a boolean, which means it may take a true or a false value, a set, a sequence types, which is nothing but string, list, and tuples. These are the different data types that we are going to discuss in the Python. First, we'll discuss numbers. Numbers can be represented in three different forms. That is, integer number, floating point numbers, and complex numbers. An integer number. Integer numbers, which are nothing but the whole numbers. Without any fractional part, we call that numbers as an integer number. Numeric values with no decimal places or no decimal points. Example, 123 minus 789. It may be the value may be a positive value or it may have a negative value without any decimal points. There are two types of integers that we have. One is your integers with sign, the other one is boolean. So what are the two different types of integers? Signed integer, which means that it contains both positive value and negative value. The value may be a positive or a negative. The next one is boolean. It may be a true value or a false value. Types of integers. Integers are considered can be any length. So an integer value, a positive value or a negative value can be of any length, but there is a limited by the memory available, right? So we need to store the values in your programming or in your memory. So based on the memory, the length of integers can be given in your program. It is a signed representation, which means that integers can be positive as well as it can contain negative values. Next one is Boolean. Boolean values are of different types or truth values, true form, or it may be a false value. Two objects represent the values of false and true are. It can be represented as 0 and 1. False is represented as 0. True is represented as 1. Are the only Boolean objects in Python. No other object is being represented for Boolean values. So what is the value given here? Bool of 0. We have a function called as bool. When you pass on the value to the as an argument to the function, it returns the value as a false. If you pass on the value as true in the sense, it will produce the value as 1. Now we'll understand how your Boolean function works. So we have to bool of value should be provided as an argument. So if bool of 1 in the sense, it returns the value as true. Same way, bool of 0 in the sense, it returns the value as false. Bool of true in the sense, whatever the argument that we are passing returns the value as true or false. Same way for false, that is, here we have written some value have been provided, which means that a string value we have provided here, so it returns the value as true. The same way it should not be considered as a false value. A string we have provided something, if we have provided, it may be 1 or 0, or if I provide with a value of 23, right? Even in this case, it will return a false. If no value has been provided in the sense, in such case, it will provide a false value. The same way, bool of, if no value is provided, that is, which means that it is 0 value. In such case only, it will return with a false value. Next, we are going to discuss about floating point numbers. If number containing a fraction part is considered as your floating point numbers. For example, 93.452 is considered as a floating point number. It can be written in two forms. A floating point number can have a precision of 15 digits, that is a double precision in Python. So what are the two different types of your floating point numbers? One is your fractional form, the other one is exponent form. Floating point numbers can be represented in two forms. One is your fractional form, the other one is exponent form. So what is the advantage of using your floating point numbers? They can represent a range of values between the integers, right? So more range of values can be represented between the whole numbers. They can represent a greater extent range of values, that is more number of precisions can be given, but even though it has a limitation of 15 digits of precision value. So we have some disadvantages of using your floating point numbers. So these are the disadvantages. Operations, that is floating point operations, are usually slower than integers, as it because it has the precision value of 15 digits. So when you are doing some operations or when you are doing some calculations of with your floating point value in the sense, it becomes slower when compared to your integer operations. Next one is going to be your complex numbers. A complex number is a number that can be expressed in the form of a plus bi. A and B are considered, this A and B are considered as your real numbers. I is considered as your imaginary number. Complex number A plus Bi is called as, will be written in the complex format. So A is called as your real part and B is called as your imaginary part. So in the complex numbers, combination of real number and it is an imaginary number. So it contains A as a real part and B is an imaginary part, where I, instead of J value that we use in the mathematical terms, in Python we are using the value of I, which means that there's a square root of -1 value. So these are some of the examples of your complex numbers. So a complex number can be a purely real or imaginary, or it may contain both your real and imaginary parts. See the first example, either part can be 0. First example, we have 3 plus 2i, which means that it contains both real part and imaginary part. Here we have 5, we don't have an imaginary part, so it is 0. So it is purely a real complex number. Here -6i, here real part is 0, so it is purely an imaginary complex number. Complex number is made up of real and imaginary part. Real part is a floating point number and imaginary part is a floating point number multiplied by the square root of 5, which is defined as j, that is a plus bj. Usually you will write these terms in mathematical terms, but in Python we will use a plus bi. Instead of j, we are going to use it as I. Even your I value, which is nothing but square root of -1. So we'll just number. A number is a variable where we are storing it as 5 plus 6j. If we can take a real part separately and imaginary part separately, if you want to know what is your real part and what is your imaginary value. So number dot followed by real gives the real value of that particular complex number. The same way number dot imaginary gives the output as 6.0, which means that complex imaginary value will be written. So type of number, type which is nothing but whatever the value that you are storing in that particular variable, if you give type, what type of value will be returned by it, which means that class complex. Now I'm going to assign a value number equal to 5 plus 4j. Right? Now I'm going to take the real part. So number a variable dot real gives the real part of your complex number. Number dot imaginary gives the imaginary value of the complex number. Same way, if we want to check the type of a particular value, in the sense you have a function called as type of the number, which means that the variable name you have to provide. Here you are getting the class complex, which means that number is of type complex. Say this, if I have a variable a equal to 5, type of a gives me integer. Same way, b equal to 4.67, 3.67, type of b gives me floating point value. So a type is a function where it returns the type of value that you have stored in the variable, which means that it returns the object types. What is an object here? The value. 5 is a value, 3.67 is also a value, 5.4j is also a value. It returns the object's type. Now we'll discuss what are the data type ranges. We have seen three different types under your numbers, that is integers, floating point numbers, and complex. What is the range that you can provide in your Python? In integers, unlimited value can be given, but based on the availability of the memory. So under your booleans, you have true and false value. Under your floating point numbers, unlimited, subject to the availability of the memory and depends upon the machine architecture, which means that how many precisions can be given for your floating point numbers. So the same way for your complex numbers also, it is depending upon the availability and based on the machine architecture, the complex value can be provided. Thank you, children. To receive our online lessons, please press the subscribe button and you will receive the latest updates.